Well, LCBC, I don't know that there's a better opportunity that I'm aware of to kind of just improve yourself than through the Leadership Summit. It's 2 days of inspiration. It's 2 days of encouragement. It's 2 days of challenge. It's 2 days of world-class communicators. It's 2 days of hearing from God. And I would just say you don't want to miss it. And it happens August the 5th and the 6th. It's a Thursday, Friday, 2 days, a little over 3 weeks away. So now's the time to go ahead and sign up. And you can actually attend in person at most of our locations, or you can also choose to attend online. It's your choice. And if you happen to be one of the over 3,000 of us who have actually attended this in the past, but maybe you missed it last year because of COVID, you don't want to miss it again. And if you've never been before, I really do not believe that you'll regret signing up this year. Now, as I get started, I also just need to give a big welcome to all of you who were formerly Parker Hill Church, but now are LCBC Church, whether you're at Clark Summit, Wilkes-Barre, Dixon City. I just need to say welcome. We were so glad to have you joining the LCBC family. And I want to give you just a greeting from some of our locations, welcoming you to our new LCBC family.
Hey, Parker Hill, for over 3 decades, we've been praying that God will continue to use us to reach more and more people for Jesus. And in you guys, we have found a kindred spirit. So welcome to the family!
Parker Hill, welcome to the family!
So welcome to Parker Hill. Well, I hope all of you are finding opportunities just to enjoy the summer. And Ruth and I are just coming off of spending the past week at Ocean City, New Jersey. And it was especially great to be there over the 4th of July holidays, all the fireworks, the flag raising ceremony, Lee Greenwood singing, "I'm proud to be an American," and then the Star Spangled Banner, and just appreciating the fact that even though our country is not perfect, it is still the greatest country in the world. So I hope you're finding opportunities to enjoy these summer months. But I'm also excited to be back and excited for us to jump back into our series of studies that we've entitled When God Makes No Sense. And so let me invite you to grab a Bible and open it up to the book of Habakkuk. If you happen to be in one of our buildings, then the Bible's around your seats. It's page 712 in the Bibles there at your seats. Habakkuk chapter 1, page 712. As you open up the Bible, I'd also just tell you that our offer for free coffee, if you happen to be in any of our buildings and you can open up your Bible to Habakkuk, then we've got a free cup of coffee for you. And all you have to do is just go up and say, "Yeah, I was able to do it." We'll give you a cup of coffee. I have to do it myself. Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk is the way I kind of do this. There we go. And so I'd love to give you a free cup of coffee at any of our 18 locations. If you're joining us online from home, you're kind of on your own for your coffee, or better yet, plan to join us in person next weekend because you don't want to miss out on a free cup of coffee. Now, the book of Habakkuk is actually named for Habakkuk, but it's really not about Habakkuk at all. It's really a book about God. And what Habakkuk actually teaches us is that the more you know God, the better you're going to be able to deal with the difficulties of life. And we know that life gets difficult. And Habakkuk actually teaches us that God is bigger than what our mind can even comprehend. And can I just tell you, that's a good thing. I am so glad that God is bigger than what my mind can handle or comprehend. And I'm glad that God is bigger than what your mind can actually comprehend. And so centuries before Jesus actually came to earth, this ancient prophet by the name of Habakkuk actually looked around the world, and he looked at the violence and the wickedness specifically in his country, and he cried out to God and he said, "God, why are you tolerating this? Why are you putting up with all this wrongdoing? Why are you silent when the wicked just swallow up those who are more righteous?" Or simply stated, Habakkuk was saying, "Look, according to what I know of you, God, according to what I know of you and who you are, this doesn't make sense." And this little book of the Bible is described as this, it describes this intense personal struggle that actually is going on between Habakkuk and God, because the way things were going in the world, they didn't seem to match up to who Habakkuk knew God to be. And They didn't match up with a God who's supposed to be good and strong and just. And Habakkuk's view of God, they didn't fit what he was experiencing God doing in the world, or maybe more importantly, they didn't match up with what God wasn't doing in the world. And so let's read Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. We read it last week, we'll read it again, just to kind of remind you, this is the way Habakkuk is feeling. Verse 2, Habakkuk 1, page 712. Habakkuk says, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help? But you do not listen. Violence is everywhere. I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see the evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law has become paralyzed. There's no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted." And Habakkuk is frustrated, and he's frustrated with God. And most of us have come to a time in our lives where we seriously question God. We have doubts about God, and maybe you're in that situation right now, where God isn't making sense to you, and you're frustrated, you're angry, and you're doubting, you're confused, maybe even fearful, and you're asking God, what in the world is going on here? God, where are you with all the violence that's going on in the world? There's no justice in our court systems. God, what's going on, and where are you? God, when everybody around us, all they want to do is argue and fight, and it just feels like my life is upside down, the world is upside down, God, it doesn't seem right. And a friend and a pastor of mine in Dallas, his name is Bruce Miller, and he actually wrote a book about Habakkuk, and we're leaning heavily on his book in this series of studies. But Bruce actually says, imagine this. He says, imagine you're walking down the street, and as you're walking down the street, you see coming the other way an elderly woman, and she's being attacked by a gang of thugs. And as you're scanning the horizon, you notice a policeman who's just sitting on a park bench nearby. And so you shout to that policeman, and you point to the woman in distress, but the policeman does nothing to help her. He just stays there on that park bench. And wouldn't you be angry at that policeman? I mean, this policeman's response in this situation is totally out of character for what you know about police officers. And police officers always respond and help. And so in frustration, you say, this doesn't make sense. What I know to be true, what I know is typical of a police officer is not happening in this situation. And why won't they help this elderly woman? And why aren't you stopping these thugs? And essentially that's how Habakkuk felt. He was fuming with anger because God, who he knew was strong and just, appeared to be doing nothing about all the injustice around him. And yet that's God's job. That's what God is supposed to do. And in essence, Habakkuk's protest to God was, God, don't you care? And if you're just, God, why is there no justice? And my guess is, you might be asking that similar question about your life, but you also might be asking a similar question about our world as well and saying, God, we're in a world that's drowning with violence and selfishness and sin, so where are you? Why don't you do something about it? Now, prophets were actually men or women who actually spoke for God to the people. But unlike other prophets, where they were declaring God's message to the people, Habakkuk was actually dialoguing with God about the people. He was almost talking back on behalf of the people to God. And most prophets would proclaim divine judgment, where Habakkuk was pleading for divine judgment and saying, God, do something. And in this little book of 58 verses, it actually records this fascinating interchange between this perplexed prophet and his maker God. And Habakkuk is asking God the question, why? And the amazing thing is Habakkuk actually receives an answer from God. Now, as we read the words of Habakkuk and God's answer to Habakkuk, we have to realize and look at his words from two different perspectives, from two different angles, because on one hand, we can read Habakkuk's words and take them very personally and on a personal level, and meaning we can read and say, okay, how does this apply to me personally? What does this mean for me? And too often we make the mistake of just stopping there and just looking and say, okay, what does this mean for me personally? And the truth is, Habakkuk's words, they were actually directed to a much broader audience. And not just an individual, they were actually meant for an entire nation and even the world beyond that nation. And so from a global perspective, Habakkuk looks at his own people, he looks at his own country, and he asks God, how can you put up with this country? How can you put up with all the injustice and unrighteousness that's going on in our country with our people? And God, aren't you going to do something about it? God, where are you? Do something. And one of the lessons that we need to learn as we read the book of Habakkuk is that God is doing so much more in the world than we can think or even possibly know. And we think it's about me and how's it impacting me and what's it doing to my life. But it's not just about me. It's not just about you. See, one of the mistakes that we make when we read the Bible is to think it's all about me, and we tend to keep it very personal, and it is a very personal book, and it is about you and me, but God is up to so much more than what we think, and he's up to so much more than just you and me. And so the way this plays out, I mean, so many of the songs that we sing at church, they're all about me, and they're all about you, and God is gonna give me second chances, and I'm gonna see a victory, and God is with me. My battle belongs to the Lord, and all of that is true. And those are great songs, and they're amazing songs, and I love to sing them, but God is up to more than just you and me. And he's up to something in the world, and he's up to something in our country, and God's world doesn't just revolve around you. And God's world doesn't just revolve around me. And so Habakkuk looks around his country, his nation, he says, why is there so much hatred? Why is there so much hostility? Why all this injustice? Why do good people do suffer? God, why don't you do something? Why don't you clean up this mess? Why do people openly violate your laws, your ways on every level, and that they don't even worry about, they're not even fearful of you, God? And God, do something. It doesn't make sense. And so God actually responds to Habakkuk, and he says, okay, you know what? I do see all of the violence. I do see all the injustice, and I do see all the unrighteousness. So Habakkuk, I am actually going to do something about it. And I'm sure when Habakkuk heard those words, he thought, about time. Good, thank you, God. It's about time you do something to these evil people, and it's about time that you restore our country. And so God does respond. But he responds not in the way that Habakkuk had expected, not in a way that we would want God to respond to us if we were saying, God, please restore our country here in America. And God says, you know what, I am gonna respond. I am gonna do something about it. And so now watch. And watch and pay attention. Because I'm gonna do something shocking, and it's not something that you probably thought I was gonna do. And so he tells him, he says, here's what I'm gonna actually do. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna raise up an army from another country, and that army is gonna be more cruel, more violent than anything you've ever seen before. They're gonna come in, they're gonna swoop in like evils, they're gonna devour their prey, and Habakkuk, their prey is you, their prey is your nation. And God was about to raise up this nation that was more violent, more ruthless than any army before, and they were going to destroy God's own people because of their persistent sin. And not surprisingly, Habakkuk says, oh, wait a minute, God, that's not what I meant. When I asked you to come and restore, that's not what I wanted. How could you use people that are so much worse than we are? They're terrible people, and yeah, we've got our issues, but they're worse than us. How could you use them to make things right? That's not fair. But that's exactly what God planned to do. And I mean, imagine that this message applies to us. I mean, these words were actually directed to the nation of Israel, not to the United States, but America's still a nation that's sinking further and further into violence and just sin. And so what God, if he were to answer our prayer for restoring our country, if God were to say, okay, I'm gonna do something about the injustice in America, and I'm actually gonna do something. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna raise up a cruel nation, another army to come in and conquer the United States, a country that's going to come down more swiftly, more violently than we ever possibly imagined. And how would we respond to God? And I think like Habakkuk, we would be shocked. I think we'd be astounded. I think we'd say, this is incomprehensible. God, how could you do that? They're worse than we are. So how could you use them to come in and rectify what's going on in our country? And so Habakkuk, he's not happy. He actually has more questions for God than he has answers, and he saw God's cure as being worse than God's, response to the sickness of the people. And God had answered Habakkuk's prayer, but not in the way that he had hoped. And so God's solution, it leaves Habakkuk even more frustrated, more confused, more angry. And have you ever prayed and asked God to do something and found that actually what he provided was worse than what you had before? You pray one day for God to do something, the next day it's actually worse. And I mean, what do you do when God responds to your prayers in ways that actually just leave you confused? And I would imagine you'd scream and say, God, no, that's not what you were supposed to do. That's not the way things were supposed to work out. And we all experience times of frustration with God. Maybe for you, you say, God, why in the world? Why in the world have you not changed the heart of my husband who turned his back on you, God, 23 years ago? Why have you not changed his heart? I go, why did you let my parents get a divorce? Or God, why? Why did my sweet, faithful, godly mother contract cancer twice, and yet she died of cancer then at the age of 69? Why didn't you heal her, God? Or God, why are you allowing the violence to run rampant in our country, in the world? Why aren't you doing something about it? God, why didn't you stop that condo from collapsing on all those people in Florida? And God, why aren't you answering our prayer for a child? That's all we want is a child. And or God, why am I still stuck in this dead-end job? I've been praying to you again and again, asking you for something, and nothing's happening. And or God, why did our daughter have to be sexually abused? Or God, why do I keep struggling with this addiction? I've asked you over and over to remove any desire for it, and yet I still am out of control. And so you don't understand what God is doing, and you find yourself stuck, and you find yourself frustrated with God, and that's how Habakkuk felt. And so he's crying out to God, and our tendency when we don't understand what God's doing is just to walk away from him. Our tendency is just to shut him out of our lives, to quit going to church and just walk away from God. But I would just say that would be a mistake, a huge mistake. And instead, when you don't understand what God is doing, when life is really confusing, when you feel stuck, can I just say, don't run from God. That's not the time to run from God. Instead, that's the time to lean into him and go to him and ask him the questions you have. And God is not afraid of your questions, and God's not gonna discipline you or punish you because you've got questions, because you're asking him why. Instead, he says, just come to me. Come to me. And so that's what Habakkuk actually does. Go back to Habakkuk chapter 1. Look at verse 12. Habakkuk comes back to God in his frustration. He says, oh, Lord, my God, my Holy One, you who are eternal, surely you do not plan to wipe us out, do you? He's asking. Oh, Lord, our rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us for our many sins, but you're pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Will you wink at their treachery? And so he's coming back to God, and he's saying, God, I don't understand, I don't get it. And should you be silent while the wicked swallow up people more righteous than they? Are we only fish to be caught and killed? Are we only sea creatures that have no leader? Must we be strung up on their hooks and caught in their nets while they rejoice and celebrate? Then they'll worship their nets and burn incense in front of them. These nets are their gods who have made us rich, they will claim. He's just saying, God, are you gonna put up with this? And so he's coming back to God, and he's not comfortable yet. He's still upset, he's still questioning, and he wasn't being dramatic in his description of the Babylonians. They were wicked, cruel people, and from historical accounts, we actually know the Babylonians, sometimes they did drive a hook through the lower lip of those that they captured, and they would string them up in a long line like fish on a line in a single file, and they were known to trap people with nets and then hold them there captive as nets. And Habakkuk is watching this whole Holocaust happen in front of him, and he's saying, God, you're not gonna do anything about this? And verse 17, he says, will you let them get away with this forever? Will they succeed forever in these heartless conquests? Habakkuk didn't understand. And he has questions and more questions for God, and he's actually complaining to God. But again, in his frustration, understand Habakkuk, he doesn't run from God. He actually runs to God. He doesn't pick up his toys and say, you know what, if we're not gonna play the way I wanna play, God, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. And when you're confused, when you're upset about God, don't stop showing up at church. Don't stop talking to God. Don't stop reading your Bible. Don't walk away from God. That would be a huge mistake. Instead, in your frustration, instead of turning away from God, run to him, lean into him. And when you don't understand what God is doing, when life is incredibly confusing to you, go to God with your questions. And that's what Habakkuk actually did. And so when we turn back to God, and our frustration, what is it that we actually do when we're stuck? And when you're confused and when you're wondering, God, what are you up to? What do we actually do? And so let me give you 5 very specific things that Habakkuk does in this situation when he was hurting, when he was wondering about God, when he didn't know what else to do. And I want to give you these 5 things to do when God doesn't make sense. And I would encourage you, pull out a piece of paper, pull out your phone, write them down, because if you're not confused, frustrated with God now, you're gonna be in the future. You know others that are. You're gonna wanna have these things down. And the first thing Habakkuk does does is he actually looks back and he remembers. And he steps back and says, okay, let me just remember the character of God. Let me fall back on the unchanging character of God until he takes time to slow down and remember who God is. Go back to verse 12. He says, oh Lord, my God, my Holy One, you are eternal. He says, oh Lord, you are our rock, he describes him. And in his confusion, he goes back to what he knew to be true about the character of God. And there are times that we need to just slow down and remember that God is our rock. God is our refuge. You may not understand what he's doing. You may not like what he's doing in the moment, but he's still our rock. He still is our refuge. We still can go to him and cling to him. He's going to be our protection in storms, and there's no one else like him. Even though we don't understand what he's doing, even though we don't understand why he's doing things the way that he is. And maybe you're new to this whole thing of God, and so there's not a whole lot of history for you to look back to see about God. And that's when I would encourage you to look beyond yourself and actually understand God is bigger than what you have experienced, and there are others that have experienced things. And so you look back and you look at the lives of others, and you look at the lives of your friends, and you look at the lives of those around church or those throughout history. And which can I say, that's just one of the reasons why we're constantly encouraging you to join a group around LCBC, because you don't want to do life alone, and you want to be able to see what God is doing in the lives of others as well. You're not alone on this journey, and it's why we're constantly showing you videos of lives that have been changed by Christ, so you can see how God is working, so that you can see that God has worked throughout history. And so the first thing Habakkuk does, the first thing we want to do, is actually remember. It's okay, God, I don't see it right now, but here's who you are. Throughout history, this is who you've been, and so I'm going to hang on that and trust you for that. The second thing that Habakkuk does is in chapter 2, verse 1. He says, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to climb up on my watchtower and stand at my guard post. There I will wait to see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaints. So again, he's not even denying that he's complaining. He says, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to climb up on my watchtower. I'm going to climb up to a place, and I'm just going to wait. And God, I'm going to wait and see how you respond. And so first thing he does is he remembers. Second thing he does is he waits for a response from God. Here's the thing about waiting. Waiting is hard. Waiting feels like a waste of time to us. I mean, God knows and understands it's hard for us to wait, which is why I suppose throughout the Bible, he's constantly telling us, reminding us, be patient and wait. And what we have to learn about God when we wait is God doesn't always operate at our timetable. And so one of the favorite verses for so many people throughout the Bible is Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. I mean, you've heard this verse. But they who wait for the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. And it's a great verse. And the thing is, it's especially a favorite verse for Philadelphia Eagle fans because it mentions eagles in there, which almost spoiled the verse for me, where I don't even almost like the verse sometimes. But then as I was thinking about it, I actually just realized, no, actually these words are good for Eagles fans, because what did it take, 57 years they waited for their one and only Super Bowl, and that's a lot of waiting. So I thought, okay, maybe it is a good verse for Eagle fans. And we don't like to wait. We want things to happen now. We want instant coffee. We want instant bank transfers. We want fast food. We want information at our fingertips instantly when we search. We want to find ways to communicate instantly with people all over the world, and on it goes. And I actually remember the first time I ordered something online from Zappos. I love Zappos. I think they're amazing. And I ordered these shoes. I was sitting at home in the afternoon. They showed up on our front porch the next morning, first thing in the morning. So less than 24 hours, they delivered those to my doorstep. It was incredible. But you know what happens now? I get frustrated. I mean, I want my shoes faster, and so I order them that day, and then I want to know, well, why do I have to wait till tomorrow? Why can you not have them here today? And we don't like waiting. Waiting makes us feel like we're stuck, and we struggle waiting because it makes us feel like God isn't listening to us. Why would he make me wait? We kind of wonder. It makes us feel like God doesn't care about us. But here's what we need to understand. God's silence doesn't mean he's absent. Just because you don't hear something from him right away doesn't mean he's absent. And understand that his delays are not his denials. Just because he doesn't answer right away doesn't mean he's saying no. It doesn't mean anything. It just, he's not answering right now. And that God doesn't operate on our timetable. And often he moves in countercultural ways. And from our perspective, it seems like God is taking way too long to act. But from his perspective, he says, I'm always going to do things at the very exact right time. And the waiting's hard. And when God's not doing what we want him to do, some people choose to walk away from God. You might choose to doubt God. You might choose to quit on God. You might see it as a waste of time, but we've got to learn to wait and wait well and trust in God's timing. And Habakkuk actually remembers, he waits. And then the next thing he does is he listens. He actually listens to God. And it's not easy when you're hurting to listen, because when you're hurting, what you want to do is you want to actually talk to God. You want to tell him what you want him to do, and you want to know when he's going to do what you want him to do. But Habakkuk actually, he stops. I mean, he was doing that. He was saying, God, this is what you need to do, but he stops. He remembers, he waits, and then he stops, and he just listens, and he gets quiet. And you want to tell God what to do, but instead of telling God what to do when you're confused, it's important just to stop and be quiet and listen. Because here's the thing, our God is a God who speaks. And God can speak to you through his word, the Bible. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you can listen to God every day by reading his word, the Bible, every day. And these are his words. And so you feed on them. And you listen to what he has to say, and you hear the voice of God, or he can speak to you through his Spirit. Because if you have Jesus in your life, his Spirit is in your life, and he can speak to you in your soul through nudges or just impressions. And God can speak to you through people. He can speak to you through circumstances. He can speak to you through a message, through a song. So many ways that God can speak to us. But if he doesn't answer you and speak to you in the way that you want right away, don't panic. Just because he's silent doesn't mean he's absent. He's always there. He's always with you. And so you listen for his voice. And as you listen, be ready. Because sometimes God is going to hear you, and you're going to hear from him. It just may not be the way you want to hear it. And that's what was happening with Habakkuk. And you're expecting God to say something one way, and he says, I don't think so. I think we're going to do this differently. Habakkuk, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up an army. And I'm going to restore your nation, but I'm going to do it by raising up an army that's more cruel, more violent, more evil than you've ever seen before. And I'm going to go ahead and bring judgment on your people now. And so when God does speak, Habakkuk, he remembers, he waits, he listens, and then he actually writes it down. This is something that God tells him to do. So God is speaking, verse 2, Habakkuk chapter 2. He says, write my answer plainly on tablets so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. He says, write it down. He says, remember, wait, listen, and then write down what I have to say. And so should we. As we listen to God and we wait on him, we write it down, we document it. And the reason we do it is because we've got this spiritual enemy whose mission in your life is to destroy you. His mission in life is to just take away anything that God may be saying or doing with you. And so you write it down so you can go back to it. Because our enemy wants to take away from you the very thing that God actually gives you. And this happens all the time. Maybe for you, it happened even last week. You were in church, you heard from God, and God spoke to you and God moved you, but then you went out and you got in your car and you drove away and the kids were fighting, or your cell phone rings and you have a disagreement with your spouse, and you go home and you kind of think, did God really say that to me today? And you get distracted. And so you write it down and you put it on paper and you go back and you hang on to it and you embrace it. And because you wrote it down, you can go back anytime and you can say, okay, wait, there it is. It's right there. I wrote it down. That's what God said for me. And I trust that he's going to do what he said for me at his appointed time. And the last thing Habakkuk actually does, he remembers, he waits, he listens, and he writes it down, and then he tells other people about it. He tells other people about it. And you and I, we can tell other people about what's happening in our lives. And so you have a story to tell. We're just coming off the series we called Mixtape, and all we were doing, all the speakers were saying, here's my story. And you have a story as well, and you can tell your story. And nobody can tell you you're telling your story wrong. It's your story. And so you tell others what God has done in your past, and you tell others what you're struggling and waiting for from God. And you tell others how God is responding, because other people need to hear what God is doing as well. And then when God says he's going to do it, it will happen. Look at verse 3. God's speaking. He says, this vision, it's for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently. It's like God says, wait for it, it's coming, for it will surely take place. it will not be delayed. Always remember, if it's not God's time, you can't force it to happen. But if it is God's time, you can't stop it from happening. And though it may seem like he's lingering, you wait for it. His timing is perfect. And you may say, it's taking forever. I can't see what you're doing, God. It's not coming to pass. And can I just say, one of the key traits of somebody that's growing up in their faith in Jesus, one of the traits of a mature follower of Jesus is being able to wait. Wait expectantly, patiently for God to fulfill his promises. And when you're trying to hang on to your faith and you're not seeing anything happening and you're getting impatient, you're starting to wonder, God, where are you? Remember, God's delays are not his denials. And just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean God isn't there, doesn't mean God doesn't care. At an appointed time, God's plans and his ways will come to pass. And at an appointed time, God is going to deliver. At an appointed time, God is going to respond. At an appointed time, God is going to do his perfect will. And at an appointed time, it is going to happen, and you can count on that. And finally, in this passage, God summarizes his entire message to Habakkuk in one verse. And a lot of theologians actually say this is the most important verse in the book of Habakkuk, but a lot say it's one of the most important verses in the entire Bible. See, Moses actually gave Israel 613 commands. David reduced it down to 11. Micah actually reduced it to 3, but Habakkuk, it's just 1. It's found in verse 4 of Habakkuk chapter 2. God says, look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. Faithfulness actually means to be reliable. Faithfulness actually means to be steadfast. It means to be unwavering, that they're going to focus in on God and they're not going to stray and vary from God. And in this verse, God's acknowledging the Babylonians are evil. He says they are evil. They're puffed up. They live crooked lives. They trust only in themselves, their power, their might, what they can see. But he says in contrast to that, the righteous person is going to live by faith. And their faith in God. And they keep on trusting God in spite of what they see, in spite of what is going on or not going on around them. The righteous don't walk by sight, they walk by faith. And our faith isn't based on what we see or what we want to happen or whether or not we're getting what we want. Our faith is based on the character and the goodness of God, and we live by faith in God. And what that means for you and me is even when things don't seem to make sense, even when I don't see it with my eyes, what you're doing, God, I'm gonna fight to trust you with all of my heart. Even though everything I want you to do, God, you're not doing, I'm gonna wait for you. I'm gonna wait for your goodness, and though I still don't see it coming, I'm gonna keep waiting. And like Habakkuk, at times when I feel disturbed or confused or upset or angry or betrayed or questioning or doubting or trying to hang on, in the face of disaster like you, Habakkuk, I'm not gonna sink into despair. I'm not gonna walk away from God. Instead, I'm gonna lean into God and be faithful to God. I'm gonna trust God to do what God said he's gonna do, because when he says it's gonna happen, it will happen at the right time. And no matter what I see, I'm gonna choose faith. No matter what I feel, I'm gonna choose faith. Even in my doubts, when I don't see a way, God, I'm gonna trust that with you there is a way. And I'm aching, God, in my heart, but I'm gonna choose to trust you. And I don't see what I wanna see, but because I'm gonna be faithful to you, God, you are faithful, I'm gonna choose to be faithful to you. And I don't understand this, but I believe, God, with everything inside of me, that you are still good, God, that you still are on your throne, and because you're on your throne, God, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna trust you, even when I don't see you moving, because I'm gonna believe that you are good. See, the whole point of Habakkuk is not to understand everything that God is doing. If you're waiting to understand everything God is doing, you're gonna be frustrated. It's not gonna happen. You can't comprehend everything about God. The point of Habakkuk is not to understand everything about God and why he does what he does or doesn't do, but rather it's to trust him and to faithfully lean into him in every situation that you're finding yourself in. So in waiting, don't walk away from God. Don't quit on God because he's not showing up the way you want him to show up. His silence doesn't mean his absence. His delay doesn't mean his denials. And so on most weekends, in a gathering like this, at this point of our message, we would actually show you a video. We would show you a video of somebody that was waiting, frustrated with God, had been waiting on God, and then God came through. And those are great stories to hear, and we actually had a bunch of them we could have shown this weekend. But today, I'm not actually going to show you a video of somebody that was frustrated and waiting on God, and then God came through. And here's why I'm not going to show you that kind of story today. Because that's not the way God always works. God answers our prayer, but it isn't always one that leaves us going, oh, this is wonderful right now. Didn't work that way for Habakkuk, and may not work that way for you. Sometimes we wait on God, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And God is up to something bigger. Bigger than you can imagine, bigger than you, bigger than me in this world. And life is not always going to be easy. Here on earth, we are going to struggle. Don't ever let anybody tell you, if you turn to God, everything is going to be easy. Jesus himself said, it's not going to be easy. This is what Jesus said. He said, I've told you these things so that you may have peace in me. He said, here on earth, you will have many trials and many sorrows, but take heart. He says, because I have overcome the world. Other translations say, be of good cheer. Why? Because you're going to get exactly what you want? No. Because at some point, when you put your trust and faith in Jesus, you're going to spend eternity with Jesus in heaven. At some point, God does conquer. He does come through. And eternity is the goal for us. Eternity is what we long for. But that's someday, and it's not yet. And so here's what we're actually going to do. The bands are going to come, and the bands are going to sing. And again, usually you might say, hey, stand and sing with him, but I'm not even going to ask you to do that today. I don't even know that I want you to stand and sing with him. Instead, I want to ask you to do something very specific. As they sing, I don't want you just to lean back and even just listen. Instead, what I'm asking you to do is ask you to lean in. Lean in to the bands and ask them to challenge you, to listen to their words and to lean in and learn something from what they're saying. And the reason why I want you to lean in is because posture matters. We all know about posture. I mean, if you're talking to somebody and you're trying to encourage them or convince them of something and they cross their arms and sit back, you know what that means. They're not buying what you're saying. Posture matters. Or if you're talking to somebody and they're talking to you and they start twitching all over, then you go, I think they're lying here. Or if you're talking and they roll your eyes, then you know they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm listening, but you're full of it. I'm not buying what you're saying. And leaning in means, okay, I'm listening. I'm listening, so speak to me. Talk to me. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. When the band is singing, I'm going to ask you to literally lean in. Now, I know as soon as I say that, because I would be saying this if I were sitting in your seats. I'm going, David, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. And I know all of you aren't going to do it, but I'm going to ask you just to lean in and say, okay, challenge me, God, through the words of the band. And my hope is that the words that they are singing become your words. And I hope you'll go ahead and not just be stubborn like I typically am, but I hope you'll lean in and say, okay, God, this is an opportunity for my life to be different. I'm listening. And so lean in to their words. Now, I'm going to pray first, and then, and wherever you are, lean in. Heavenly Father, as Jesus said, life is hard. It's full of troubles, it's full of sorrow, it's full of frustrations. We don't always get what you're doing, why you're doing it. It's just frustrating sometimes, God. And we all know that, we experience that. And sometimes it causes us to question, not just sometimes, a lot of times, it causes us to question you. Say, God, what are you doing? Where are you? Do you even care? Do you even know what's happening in my life? Father, you always know, you always care, you're always there. Sometimes your answer is, hey, you know what? I know what's going on in your life, but there's something bigger going on, and so I'm going to send this cruel, violent army to kind of wipe out your country. I'm going to change the world. Or sometimes it is very personal. But so often you tell us, wait, just wait. And remember my character, remember who I am, remember that I'm good, remember that I'm your rock. Sometimes you tell us to wait. Just wait for it, wait for it. God, help us to wait, help us to listen. Remind us to write it down and tell others. But waiting is hard, God. Sometimes you tell us we're going to wait till eternity. We sang about that earlier today, that someday, one day, we will all be with you in eternity. We'll all be with you in heaven. Those who have put our trust in Jesus, we'll be there with you. So God, today, our hope, our prayers, that we would learn to wait and not run from you, but lean into you in the midst of the waiting. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I don't believe in fairy tales. I guess I've outgrown them. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that there's something bigger than me. 'Cause I've seen it in a hospital room when the doctor said sorry. There's nothing more we can do. Well, it wasn't through. I've never seen a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, but I've got a promise I can hold in the middle of the struggle. God, if you said it, you'll perform it. May not be how I want you to, but here's what I'll do. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. I've tasted your goodness. I've trusted your promise. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. I've tasted your goodness. I've trusted your promise. I'm gonna wait on you. I know you've ordered every step. Yeah, you are the author. There's no predicting what is next, but you hold the future. And all the questions, they come second to the one I know is true. Yeah, yeah, you've always been true. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. wait on the Lord, wait on the Lord, and He will renew your strength. So wait, I say.
So LCBC, this week in the middle of your struggle, as you wait on God, may you taste of His goodness. May your strength be renewed. May trust in His character and His promise to you. May you experience His goodness. If you'd like to talk or pray with somebody about anything today, right now, if you're joining us online, the chat on the screen will remain open for the next 10 minutes or so. And so stick around, let us know how we can pray for you, or anytime during the week, you can go to the website and let us know how we can be praying for you by clicking on the prayer button. Or if you happen to be in one of our 18 locations, then as we close this gathering, there'll be people up in the front left corner of each auditorium that would love to pray and talk with you. So LCBC, this week as you go, may the Lord bless and protect you. May the Lord smile on you. May He be gracious to you. May the Lord show you His favor and give you His peace. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.